divided the nuclear world into haves and have-nots. And the dynamic is that the have-nots try to become the haves in order to get economic, political, and cultural parity. And that's why we can't win anything in a war. Because the same problems of inequality will remain. And so what we're really talking about in terms of building a survivable world is the need to link in all of our actions three basic things: nonviolence, equality, which is otherwise known as social justice, and ecological balance in terms of how we produce the goods and services that we need or think we need for existence. You can't have peace without justice. You can't have ecological balance without equality. You can't have one without the other. That's the modern world. That's the world that the Bushes do not see. And you can't get to there by drawing lines in the sand. You can only get to that world by negotiating a difficult course in which you liberate your people in order to work through what is a very difficult situation. We are in the midst, in my judgment, of a shift in human history as great as the shift into an agricultural or an industrial society. That shift can either happen with a massification of violence and conflict or by minimizing it. And you got to choose. You got to choose where your interests lay. And some of us have chosen. And I tell you flat out that my interests lie on behalf of the well-being of the human community over time. I am, like so many people in this room, tired of nationalism. Tired of the divisions that have artificially been created between and among human beings. And one of the things about being radical is to have a radical intelligence and a radical enough courage to say this is not the way that things ought to be. But there are enormous difficulties in terms of the Mideast. Among them is that you have an Israeli nation state set in an Arab population. And rather than using our intelligence and trying to figure out how to get out of this without violence, what we simply have done is we have licked the boot jack of war. Well, some of us don't play that game. And so, you know, in Hegelian terms, we do fancy philosophy, we either survive reasonably or we don't survive. The real has to become rational, or we're all finished. And I think that kind of argument must be taken to the decision makers. But in the end, I personally believe that we're the decision makers. I don't deed my life to anybody, especially an Arizona delegation which doesn't represent me and never has. Democracy is in this room or it isn't anywhere. And I think that's the lesson of the 20th century. And I would argue, in a funny way, the great revolution that was begun in the civil rights movement for which Martin Luther King spoke, he didn't make it alone. He voiced it. That movement was exported around the world, and it's now come back home. We either take the challenge, or I think we're plunged into a blindness that we're not soon to get through.
I'm going to say something that I just about said earlier tonight because someone, a poet here, said that he uses it, he wasn't on the stage with the flag. And you're talking about nationalism. This is speaking symbolically, of course, but what I have concluded is that all flags, all are Lucifer's flag. I mean, the problem that we're suffering from goes back a long ways. We're just now experiencing the culmination of it. We can't go on pretending what we've been pretending for 5,000 years.
I would agree. You invited those of us who are experienced in the last peace movement to put our 2 cents worth, man.
Would you stand up so we can all hear?
More than 2 cents. I want your soul. I want your body.
Well, they had it last time. I was the resident at SDS headquarters in Toledo, Ohio in '66 and '67. Anyway, I noticed a couple of things here. For one thing, if you're going to call television stations, since most of you aren't willing to make 7 phone calls, concentrate where the action is. Channel 5 and Channel 15, they're independent. They're the ones that you can lean on the easiest. You go to the networks, they don't care what you think. So 12, 10, and 3, you're not going to get anywhere with because they.
5 didn't care even when I called.
Well, the point is 5 is local. Okay, so you got a chance with 5, 15, 45, or even 21, the religious station. The other thing I've heard here today that's kind of given me pause is several different, in other words, this is a coalition group, okay? And I think somebody's going to have to make the hard decision at some point. Are we for all these other issues, or are we simply trying to stop the war? Now, every time you include another issue, you exclude some more population. As long as you keep it to a single issue, you can eventually and quickly perhaps become a majority group. But every time, if you say it's only Christians who oppose the war, you cut out some people. If you say it's only environmentalists that oppose the war, you've kicked out some more people. And I think that I realize that there are different groups here that are organized for different things and they have their own agenda. But since this is a meeting to stop the war, I know when I was handing out that literature to get people to come to the rally tomorrow, the thing I got kicked back on was Martin Luther King. He said, we're not going to go for that. We voted against it. And I said, well, wait, you're against the war, aren't you? Yeah, well, we're against the war. Well, come on down, And I was a tactical error because we want people there to oppose the war. This is our last chance, which I think it's very, very late. But you can't have it all. If you could have it all, you would have won as a group before we got here. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to triage. You're going to figure out what can you do. Maybe, if we're real lucky, we might stop the war, given another year of effort. But the big advantage we have is that we're starting so quickly this time. And in Vietnam, it took 5 years of combat before there was anything going. And we're starting before they fired. Before they fired their first shot, we had our first protest. So we're ahead of the game this time. But you're going to have to decide what you want to do and what you think you can win at. And I think we should, pare it down to just stopping George Bush's war.
Dangerous is Bush and all of the hawks tend to wrap themselves in the American flag and accuse those of us that would stand up against the war as not being patriotic. And I think it's very important that it is our flag, and we always have our flag at our rallies because it's just as much our flag as it is theirs. And I think it's a key issue that we will probably be criticized for lacking patriotism. And I think that's very unfortunate.
I have a question for you. Our grandson is in Kuwait, in the military, and he called last night. He said he couldn't get any information about what was happening. They don't tell him what's going on. They don't offer newspapers and magazines, so we couldn't just get him a newspaper and all. But I mean, he really feels isolated, and they all do over there. His water's rationed. He's exhausted because he's overworked all the time. And that was kind of upsetting. But my question to you is about what's happening with the news media. Do you know about that? I've heard a little bit of the news about how the government is keeping them from shooting the pictures they want to and is proposing ways to stop them sending information out. Do you know more about that?
Not really, other than having been a newspaper person when I was younger. I'd probably talk, and having done a lot of media work. What I think is you've got two kinds of reporters. I think the reporters who are interested in anything that will fly in terms of story, excitement, visuals, so they can photograph machinery. Peace doesn't make very good television. War does. And then you've got investigative reporters, a few who will try to get information. The difficulty is that many of these people have been locked out, beginning with the invasion of Grenada. And the press really has not yet, I think, come to an understanding of what its mission is, its function in a democratic society. The function is very simple. It's to keep the government honest and the people true. So I don't think, I am very, I don't believe that we've got a democracy that is working. And I think it in part is because people have forgotten what their various roles are in a democratic society. And the press, I think, needs to be reminded. And I think some of the members of the press got burned during the Reagan years and is still trying to figure out what happened to make that presidency possible, what their role was in creating the Teflon president. It's Petro's description of Congresswoman Sherman.
Yes, real quickly. You know, in the true sense of the meaning of the word democracy, when you look at the meaning since antiquity, we know what the contemporary meaning is now, but the word since antiquity comes from the Greek word demokratian, and da meaning to divide and rule. The kratian means to rule, divide and rule, or divide and conquer. And that seems to be the manner in which Bush and much of the media is operating, according to the original meaning of democracy, not according to the one that we have been taught.
I've always assumed that democracy, in Lincoln's phrase, government outlined for the people.
Yeah.
But we have to become a people rather than a mass. To become a people is to act out the triple goals of democracy and values of equality, liberty, and human solidarity, or community, what used to be called fraternity. And I think if we don't have any of those, we're in trouble. Maybe I'll just close. One of my favorite characters, George Orwell, 1984. If people were to believe in a leader with semi-divine powers, their prevailing moods must be fear, hatred, and orgiastic triumph. In other words, it was necessary that they should live continuously in a state of war. It did not matter very much whether the war was actually happening, and since no decisive victory was possible, it did not even matter whether it went well or badly. All that was needed was that a state of war should exist to produce the necessary hysteria and to serve as a pretext for every kind of tyranny and inequality. Big Brother reigned in the hearts of the people because he saved them from imaginary perils and because he flattered their vanity by winning imaginary victories. In place of liberty, they had a sense of deliverance, and in place of physical well-being, they had military glory. The war was not really waged against any external enemy, but in each country was waged by the ruling castes against their followers. Its secret purpose was not to make or prevent conquests of territory, but simply to keep the ruling castes in power.
Thank you, Dr. Reeder. I think one of the things that, and we've talked about this before, one of the weaknesses of the peace movement has been that we have not made the interconnections of the justice movement and the environmental movement. Now, in the last few years, we brought the environmental aspect into it, and I think what may be suffering at this point because of our concentration on war here and the environment here, I think goes back to the haves and have-nots. And yet I think that may be the war that we're seeing now. So if there's a silver lining in any of this, I think one of the things may be to draw all of these groups together, the homelessness, the environment, and so on. And David and I have spoken before about once we get over this crisis, that perhaps there's a possibility of using the structure and the mechanism that we have to start addressing some of these interrelated issues. Okay, and hopefully we won't have to concern ourselves and focus on this for terribly long. Okay, we want to do, I think, a little more strategizing. When David and I were in Prescott, they were trying to come up with some of the ideas for what they could do, given that's a different community. One of the things, and this is just for them, they wanted to do a blood drive because they want to make sure that they support the people in the military there. We don't want to repeat the mistake of Vietnam. When we left those people basically standing at the train stops and at the airports. And I think one of the ways we can do this is for those of you who can't give blood to do that and to make sure that we're planning way ahead of time to be there and support those people. I think we're already getting some semblance of that as well. They also had some ideas. They have an older community there, Pets for Peace and all sorts of things. And I think that's some of the things we need to strategize because the rallies are going to go for so long and the street demonstrations are going to go for so long and the letter writing and so on, and then we're going to have to get very creative if this is going to last for any period of time. And that's the type of creativity that we're looking for, I think, maybe to come out. Just to do a little bit of brainstorming here about what are some of the other things after this week, okay? Assuming, I don't know how Dr. Reeder reads this, but I personally don't think we're looking at the 15th or the 16th. Myself, I think we're maybe looking in terms of the next couple of weeks, but I think just because of the gear up.
I think the if I've got to talk strategy, I think perhaps the only thing that might keep us out of the war is for you and I to be in the streets in vast numbers. And the sooner we can do that, and using every opportunity, that means marching with the King people, holding signs, because we're going to have NBC television now, minimally, because the King of Holiday has brought Arizona the focus of the nation. I think tomorrow evening, have people out. The mass demonstrations, what I would hope will be mass demonstrations in Washington on the 19th and the 26th. See, I think the thing that we need to do is to bring bodies to the point of decision. Okay. And the decisions have been made in Washington, and I think we've been building within the peace community toward a mass demonstration 19th, 26th. I don't know whether we've got time, but that's no longer in our hands. I mean, when the president, if the president decides to pull the trigger or to order that the triggers be pulled, we don't control anymore. The Congress has given the president a blank check, no matter how close to the vote. What we've got control of is this, our physical bodies, and where we locate it in the next several weeks and months, and I think that's important.
Let me mention here, as he spoke, there was an article in Saturday's paper about the possibility of the phone lines being jammed. Maybe some of you saw that if war breaks out. So apparently we can't count on being able to contact each other or even for our answering machine for that first 24 hours is what they're suggesting. So you may be having to listen to your televisions and your radios and to know ahead of time, as David outlined the strategy, if hostilities do break out. Don't count on being able to use the telephone. I was surprised. I mean, I could understand that on a long distance level, but I had no idea that it would impact locally, and it will. All right, Nancy was.
How about notification of high school students? A lot of young people are really upset because they're the ones that are going to end up over there, and they have PA systems. And John McCain went to Glendale High School today. If he can talk to them, we can talk to them. Get those kids out there on the streets. I noticed when we handed out yellow ribbons and carried our signs at Metro, a lot of the young kids were real positive. They
really
want
have not
help.
addressed the high schools, let's,
No.
you know.
Do we have speakers here for that example? I work in a Peoria school district, and, I mean, there's such a wide variety, such a chance to do something, but who is gearing toward that population?
Well, I mean, I taught in high school in Vienna, and so our problem is that we are down to a very few people who do these speaking engagements, and we're the same people who are also doing the organizing of all the media and so on. So if any of you people are willing to go into the high schools and speak from whatever level, you know, you don't have to have a high school education degree to be able to do this.
Could I make a suggestion? Passing paper around, people signing what they can do, what they want to do. And that's the beginning of people doing things.
Okay, let me send then three. Okay, let me send several pieces of paper around, or we won't be able to. I'm going to put name here, okay, and then on the other side, we'll put activity. It can
And
be.
how to contact, phone number,
Okay.
Get your
one-
fax
address.
machine.
Okay,
Get your
one-
fax
one-
machine, a couple of them posted.
fax machine's good,
Okay,
used by a
wait a minute
Chinese
here.
student.
Okay, so you'll be getting one of these at these three tables and then another one here. It's going to say name, phone, and activity. If you're willing to go into the high schools, or if you're willing to hold a coffee, if you're willing to contact the media,
I do.
whatever it is, or if you thought of something that